After living in regret for the last couple of years, it was time to take action and rebuy one of my favourite lenses to see if it really is as good as I remember. In today's video, I'm going to compare the Voigtlander 1.7 Ultron to the Voigtlander f2 Ultron, and I'll also include a few other lenses as we go. Hey guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. First, a huge thanks to my awesome patrons. If you want to see more of my photo shoots, links below to that. So the main part of the video, I'll compare the 35 1.7 Ultron to the 35 f2 Ultron, but I'll also include the Type and the Light Lens Lab for a few of the tests. My journey started when I got the 35 1.7 Ultron and I was very happy with the sharpness. Then they released the f2 Ultron, so I replaced the 1.7, and since then I've always wondered, is it as sharp as the Discon, which I tested, which is very sharp, and is it better than the new Type 35 1.4? Let's first name drop a few alternatives if you're on the market for a 35mm lens for Leica. If money is no issue to you, I would get the 35 f2 Apo from Leica. This was shot with that lens and it is fantastic. If you want something cheaper, I'd highly recommend the 35 Apo from Voigtlander, and if you need something faster, I'd get the Discon from Zeiss. If you're looking for the best all-rounder lens for Leica M mount, there's probably 4 options, of which I'm going to test 3 in this video. Sadly, I don't own the Nocturne. The 1.7, the f2 and the Type, and then if you want something smaller, I'll mention the Light Lens Lab for some tests. The main focus of this review is going to be the Voigtlander Ultron 1.7, which I just rebought because I'm really interested to know, is it actually as good as the 35 f2 Ultron, and would maybe something like the Type be better for a low light lens. So I'm going to compare all lenses pretty much to this lens, and then for a lot of the sample photos it's just going to be the 35 1.7, which I've not had for 2 years and I bought just to make this video. Okay, so first, sun stars of the 35 1.7. This lens is fantastic if you like sun stars, and as you can see from some of these kind of real sample photos, if we zoom in, this is probably shot around f2.5 and the sun stars are fantastic. Here are the sun stars at different f-stops with the 1.7 Ultron. Here's sun stars at the f-stops with the 35 f2. And here's sun stars with a Type. You get more points because it's got more aperture blades. If we zoom in, you can see I think the Ultron 1.7 has slightly better sun stars than the f2, but make up your own mind from the sample pictures. They're just that little bit more crisp, I think, from the 1.7. Vignetting. So how does the light fall off compared to the 1.7 versus the f2? From my results, they seem very similar at each f-stop. Lens bokeh. This is popular for portrait photographers like myself. The 1.7 does have very beautiful lens bokeh shot to wide open, as you can see from these sample images. Here's the bokeh from all 4 lenses shot to wide open, and let's now take a close look at each one. So 1.7 versus f2, the 1.7 bokeh is bigger because it focuses closer, and from 2.8 onwards you get more angular bokeh because of the number of aperture blades. If you love smoother, rounder bokeh balls, definitely consider the Type 35 1.4 because that will give you rounder bokeh balls at any given f-stop. Looking at the Ultron lenses, the bokeh is circular in the centre and more cat-eye shape or oval in the corners. Chromatic aberration. Both Voigtlander Ultron lenses exhibit chromatic aberration or purple fringing at wider apertures, but once you stop down to say f4 onwards, that's cleaned up. Lens flare. If you catch the light on the very edge of the frame of the 1.7 lens, you can get lens flare, but to the most part, it's really not an issue with this lens, and I don't really think you need a lens hood. Lens sharpness. So first let's look at sharpness at minimum focus distance, which is around 0.5 to 0.58 meters depending on the lens. So I grabbed a bigger camera as my model. This is a 4x5 speed graphic with aero ectar lens, and then I focused all lenses as close as they could go and compared each one. So I used my Leica SL as my camera with a 10 times zoom for critical focus. Now this is a key point of the video, so the Ultron 1.7 is not sharp up close until around f2.8. If you compare that to the f2 Ultron, if we zoom in for a closer crop on the aero ectar words, as we get closer and closer with the crop, you'll see that the f2 Ultron is sharper than the 1.7 Ultron at close focus distances. These are both shot at f2.8, and you can see the f2 Ultron is clearly sharper than the 1.7. and it works out roughly 1 stop sharper to get a similar looking photo. I wasn't convinced, so I did some outside testing of the same kind of minimum focus distance test, and again the f2 Ultron wins. So if close focus is important, get the f2 at this stage. Okay, next let's compare some more lenses. So there you can see my setup. So now comparing to the Type. Now the Type has got a floating element, so you can see it's a lot sharper than the 1.7 Ultron. but is it sharper than the f2 Ultron? We zoom in, it is also sharper than the f2 Ultron. If we now check the Light Lens Lab 35 f2 8 element, the sharpness I would say is almost the same as the Ultron, maybe slightly sharper at this distance. Now how about infinity? So at infinity things are completely different. You can see that red box, that's a crop we're going to look at. At f2 the 1.7 is a lot sharper than the f2 lens at infinity or a longer distance. You can see now we're going to go even more into the corner. First you can see the sharpness at 1.7 is pretty much the same as the f2 on that lens, and comparing it to the f2 lens, the 1.7 is much sharper in the corners and in the edges. This is why I remember this lens being so good. I wasn't going crazy. Compared to the Typock, it's also sharper, and compared to the Light Lens Lab, it's much sharper in the corners. Now let's take an edge crop just to compare that as well. The 1.7 you can see is sharper on the left. If we stop down, it's still sharper, so 1.7 wins. I wanted to repeat the test in daylight to see how it compared. This time I'm using the Leica M10, not the SL. This time the results are much closer. I think the 1.7 still has a slight edge advantage, but they are much closer. Here's me shooting at different f-stops, and then this is now our center crop, again comparing both lenses. So 1.7 versus f2 Ultrons, again very similar, maybe slight edge to the 1.7, but it depends where you look in the frame. I tried various crops and it was difficult to decide a winner from these two lenses. The f2 was definitely better this time round. Let's now look at some real photos shot with the 1.7. So these are photos where I just shot some raw photos with the M10 in London and on the way into London. Then I just added one of my Mr. Leica M10 black and white presets to flip them to black and white for my use, as I do with my model photos. I still need to finish my M10 presets to make those available. I am working on them, I just haven't finalised them yet. As you can see, the 1.7 lens is a great walk around lens if you just want sharp photos at 1.7. What about for portraits? So these portraits are shot with available light only with my lovely model Amy. And so this is just shooting wide open at 1.7, probably maybe 1 meter distance. Some of these are obviously a bit further away. Now, I really wanted to shoot with flash, so I use an ND filter and a mist filter for the next series of photos. Obviously you can see I'm using the SL and I'm using the 1.7 lens with flash on the as you can see on the top of the camera for some on-camera flash, more fashiony looking photos hopefully, and I tried to drag the shutter in some photos as you can see in these. The purpose of these portraits was because in my first 35 1.7 video I said it was too sharp for portraits, but if you use a mist filter in this example, or if you just use good lighting, you can use it for portraits with no issues whatsoever. I did want to do that with flash just to get a different look from the photos, but that just coincided with the shoot that I had planned on the day that I wanted to test this lens. If like me you get sick of the grey, wet, miserable winter days that we get here in the UK, flash is a really good way to mix things up a bit and just to give a different lighting setup than just the usual available light. For these photos I was trying to drag the shutter and then get a bit more motion in the trains in the background, and it's really easy using the SL because on the SL what you see is what you get to the viewfinder, and then I just set the manual flash to the desired power that I needed, and then I was shooting both digital and film, so with manual flash, so you don't need TTL. I much prefer manual flash than TTL flash. Here's my film setup. I was using a Nikon FM3A with a color scope R28 2.8, another great lens, and I still need to develop the film, but all that coming soon. So we then moved into the Barbican to do more photos, again still with the 35 1.7 and flash. It was really windy that day, and me and Amy were both absolutely freezing to death, so by the time the 2 hours was up we were ready to kind of finish and go and get warm. It was so cold. Amy did a great job keeping going, but luckily she brought lots of layers. For these photos I'm using the flash as a fill rather than as the key light, and then it gives you a different look by getting the model to turn her nose towards the available light, and we did get a bit of break in the cloud. As you can see there's a bit of directional light from the sun. I always show the model how we're getting on, and then it gives you an idea of if she wants to change up her hair or her clothes or whatever. As I say, this is all I teach pretty much on Patreon, so if you want to see like 100+ behind the scenes videos of model shoots, join Patreon for more info on this kind of thing. Now, I also wanted to test the 28mm Typock, slightly off topic, but I had the lens with me, and I did promise in that video that I'd do some portraits at some point. This lens gives really nice poppy looking portraits, and as you can see, I'd like to think it's a very strong combo. I may need to do more of this in the future. So what is the verdict? If you want sharpness from mid distance to infinity and you want to be able to focus closer, definitely consider the 1.7 lens, because that is the strongest lens of the ones I tested for infinity focus. The problem is this lens is bigger, it doesn't have a focus tab, and yeah, I just prefer smaller lenses where possible. If you want a great all-round lens in a small package, I think the best lens is the Ultron 35 f2. It's sharp enough at infinity, but sharper up close, and it just comes in a really nice compact package. Now, if you shoot portraits like me, the best lens is arguably the Type-Lock lens, because it focuses closer at 0.45 meters, it's got the focus lock at 0.7 meters, and it's the sharpest up close. So after doing this test, the Voigtlander 35 1.7 Ultron is as sharp as I remember, but only from mid-distance to infinity. It's not sharp enough for me up close. Maybe it's just my copy of the lens, but it's not as sharp as I remember up close. The Type-Lock is very good up close because it's got the floating element, and obviously it's got the wide aperture of f1.4. It would be good to compare this lens to the Nocturne version 2 35 1.4 Classic in the future, because the Nocturne Classic is half the size of the Type-Lock. So that's maybe one I need to try to get so I can do a side-by-side test. I did just rebuy the 1.7 lens because I thought it was going to be sharper than the f2. It is, but once you shoot both lenses on an M camera, the f2 lens isn't terrible, and I think the difference is negligible when you're using a rangefinder camera, and you're going to lose maybe some percentage of sharpness by misfocusing your image. In conclusion, I'm going to return the 35 1.7, and I'm going to be happy now knowing that the 35 f2 Ultron is good enough for my needs. I'm more or less half the size. I'm still going to use the Light Lens Lab as my smallest setup, but I know that lens is soft in the corners. That's more for when I stop down and say shoot f8 or Sunny 16, and I will use the Type-Lock 35 1.4 for say portraits or anything up close. That being said, I'm probably going to use the Type-Lock 28 1.4, as you saw briefly mentioned in this video, because I know that the 28 1.4 is sharper than the 35 1.4 Type-Lock, if you can follow that. So yeah, I may need to do another video now doing portraits only with the Type-Lock 28 1.4, and maybe compare that to a few other 28mm options to see what is the best fast 28mm lens for portraits. I'm glad I did this test because I've always wondered, is the 1.7 Ultron better than the lenses I've been testing? To my eyes, it's still one of the sharpest fast 35mm lenses for M mount, but I don't think it's as sharp as the Distagon. I can link more 35mm videos to watch here next.